going to build the colliders we need for our level. Alright, so we're ready to go. We've got our character prototype in, and we've got some of the environment assets in. And so what I want to do is I want to start working toward getting the character in, but we need some ground colliders for that player character to move around in this level. So the first thing that we have are these cliff pieces, and they're pretty irregular. And we could go in and we could create some colliders out of boxes and situate those. But these cliffs have a very specific shape. And so I've gone ahead and I've created a couple of colliders for you using a 3D software package like Maya LT. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use these as our collider. So to get started, let's go ahead and go to Game Object, Create Empty, and we're going to rename this to Cliff Collider. Okay, let's go ahead and give that an icon so we can see it really easily. We're going to make that blue there, and we're going to add a component. We're going to use Physics and Mesh Collider, and then we're going to go to our mesh, and we're going to set that as Cliff Collider, and we're going to use the left one. So double click on that, and you'll notice that it doesn't show up. And the reason for that is because the scale is really, really small. So let's go ahead and just bump the scale up for this collider. Now this object, its scale is not going to affect anything, so we can bump this up pretty high if we need to. So we're going to set this up to 50, and we're going to do that in all three, the X, Y, and the Z. And I'm going to go ahead and move it over to this side. Now, it may look like it's backwards, and that's because it is, and we just need to rotate it 180 degrees, and there we go. So now you'll just position it right at the edge of the cliff, and I'm looking at this point right here. Alright, so with that set, we should be just fine. Now another thing that you'll want to pay attention to is where it is situated in the Z direction. So as you can see, it's way out here, and the player is going to be right around in this area. So we're going to set this to -1, okay, and that should be just fine. Let's go ahead and make a duplicate copy of this by hitting Control D, move that over, go to its Mesh Collider component, and switch that out with the other Cliff Collider. Now if we go back to our 2D view, we can position that right in here. Alright, so that looks good. And now all we have to do is create the colliders for the rest of our level. Now we can take this composition, so the final composition that Kurt had created, we could take that into something like Maya LT and create an image plane out of it, and then model out the entire mesh collider for this entire level. But I don't necessarily want to do that. All we needed were just the end pieces, because now what I can do is I can come in and create another game object, and I can call this ground collider underscore 3D, and then let me give it an icon, and we'll add a component. We're going to use a box collider. We're going to go ahead and leave everything set to default except for the X direction. So let's set that to 16, and then I'm going to move that over to here. Now this is the point where we need to select both colliders to kind of see exactly how they're lining up, and I'm going to bring that the ground collider up just a little bit. So right about there. That looks fine. And we could go ahead and we can move this back just to give ourselves a little bit more room. It's alright if they're overlapping one another, not a big issue. Now let's go ahead and make a duplicate of this, hitting Control D, and I'm going to move this across, and I'm going to set its size to about 8, making it quite a bit shorter. And what I want to do at this point is I want to go ahead and rotate it. So I'm going to hit E on the keyboard. I'm going to rotate it about 8 degrees or so. And actually, let's go about -12 degrees on this. So then we'll hit W, and we'll put this right up here against that tree trunk, right here. Let's go ahead and select our ground collider. We want those to collide with one another. And let me go ahead and drag this up. Actually, let's rotate it a little bit more. Right about here. We'll go ahead and we'll type in -8 just to make that a nice even number. Okay, and just trying to make sure that we overlap. That looks good. And then we'll create one more of these, hitting Control D. Then we'll rotate it to where its rotation on the Z is set to 0 again. And then we're going to put this right at the bottom of our tree trunk. Okay, so the player is going to walk out there and then come down the slope. Okay. So we'll take this one and we're just going to draw that down just a little bit. Okay, we don't have to be absolutely exact. Okay, we just need to get fairly close so that way we don't have a very noticeable bump whenever we walk over that. Okay, so that's pretty good. Go ahead and pull that back just a little bit more. Alright, so that should give us plenty for our player. Now with these ground colliders, let's make sure that all three of those are set to -1. So that way whenever we hit play and the player drops down, we can move across there. It looks like we fell through that collider. Let's check our collider here. And while we are set to -1 on that, looks like our character is set to -5. Let's go ahead and let's move that over some more there. Actually, let's just take those ground colliders. And on those ground colliders, we can move them over to the left, or we can just make them a little bit thicker, okay, in the X direction. So let's do 1.5. Make them a little bit thicker, and then we'll just kind of push those in to where they touch that. So the player is completely underneath that. Alright, so now if we hit play, the player moves around freely. You'll notice that we don't have that tree cover, so it doesn't look like it's going in that. But we are moving across the plane, moving across the grass, and then we go up the top here, and everything looks fine there. Alright, great. So now what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have the other one set. Everything's good. Okay, now what we need to do is go ahead and bring in the player. So we're going to bring in that player game object. We're going to set him up to the character game object, and we're going to start to